Christmas night. Ju Wan was a man who had never known the presence of a woman in his life. His parents had been the most precious people in his world, but a car accident on Christmas Eve a few years ago had snatched them away from him. Since then, every Christmas had become nothing more than a painful memory for him. While others spent time with their families and children, Ju Wan would wander the city streets alone. His unusually tall stature kept people at a distance, deepening his sense of isolation. That night, too, he was walking aimlessly when he suddenly spotted an old man sitting by the roadside. The man was begging, dressed in an old Santa Claus costume. Ju Wan felt a pang of pity. He took out some money and dropped it into the old man's bowl. The old man looked up and smiled. "Thank you, young man." Then a strange glint appeared in his eyes. "Tell me, do you have a wish?" Ju Wan found the man a bit odd. He started to walk away without answering, but the old man's voice echoed in his ears again. "Everyone has a wish of some kind." Just to brush him off, Ju Wan said, "I want to win the lottery." The old man chuckled softly. "A lie." Ju Wan stopped in his tracks. Looking deep into his eyes, the old man said, "Tell me the true wish hidden in the depths of your heart." The old man's question stirred up the pain hidden deep within Ju Wan's heart. After a moment of silence, he spoke softly. "I just want a happy family, a beautiful wife, and a lovely daughter." A mysterious smile appeared on the old man's face. "Your wish will be granted. If it isn't, I wouldn't consider myself worthy of being called Santa." Ju Wan found this odd. He thought the old man must be a huge fan of Santa. He laughed, walked away, and headed back toward his old apartment. Even on the late-night train, his fate refused to leave him alone. The people around him were smiling with their companions. Ju Wan took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Before long, he drifted off to sleep. But who knew that it would be his final sleep on Earth? When he opened his eyes again, he was faced with iron bars. He was confined in a cage-like wagon surrounded by frail, starving people. Some looked as though they hadn't eaten in days. Ju Wan was in better shape than them, but he was stark naked. The cold air was seeping right into his bones. Just then, his gaze fell upon a dead slave nearby who was still wearing clothes. He hesitated for a moment, but finally, with trembling hands, he removed the clothes from the body and put them on. He breathed a sigh of relief as the warmth enveloped him. Then he looked at the soldiers driving the wagon. They were speaking a strange language that he couldn't understand at all. Moreover, everyone in the cage was shackled in heavy chains. Seeing this, only one thought crossed his mind: a caravan of slaves. And at that very moment, the mysterious Santa's smile flashed in his mind. A bitter expression settled on Ju Wan's face. "That crazy Santa actually sent me to another world." The cold wind started blowing again. Ju Wan kept wondering whether his dream of finding a happy family as a slave would come true, or if that mysterious Santa had played a cruel joke on him. Days passed. Hunger and cold took a toll on his body. His cheeks had sunken and his face looked more frail than ever. Finally, one day, the caravan stopped at a village. The soldiers lined up all the slaves so the villagers could buy them. A tiny flicker of hope ignited within Ju Wan. At the very least, once sold, he would get regular meals. He was confident in his tall stature and strong physique. He imagined a wealthy man would buy him immediately. But reality was cruel. People came, inspected the slaves, and bought them. Yet no one even glanced his way. One village, 2 villages, 3 villages. Gradually, all the slaves who had accompanied him were sold off. In the end, only Ju Wan remained. His last shred of hope was shattered. Deep down, he began to curse the Santa who had shown him the dream of a happy life. That night, as the caravan moved on, Ju Wan quietly picked up a sharp thorn lying on the ground. He could no longer bear the pain. The thorn moved slowly toward his neck. Just then, a shadow stopped right in front of him. Ju Wan's hand froze. He lifted his head, and for a moment his breath caught in his throat. An incredibly beautiful woman stood before him. Moonlight fell upon her face, making her appear like a vision from a dream or an angel. The woman gently extended her hand. In her palm lay a small piece of bread. In that moment, Ju Wan felt that all the feasts in the world paled in comparison to that piece of bread. He took the flatbread with trembling hands and began eating hurriedly. The woman was saying something. Her voice was gentle. Yet Ju Wan could not understand a single word. They spoke languages from different worlds, and yet, for the first time in days, he felt that perhaps there was someone in this strange world who cared about him. Ju Hee-wan couldn't understand a word the woman was saying, but the language wasn't the reason. His entire attention was captivated by the woman's beauty and the small, adorable girl standing beside her. The woman held a piece of bread in her hand, and at that moment it seemed more precious to him than a meal from any 3 Michelin-star restaurant. A short while ago, inside a dilapidated wooden house, the woman was having dinner with her young daughter. Food was scarce. The woman gave her own portion to the child, but the girl held half the bread back out to her. "Mommy should eat too." Liz's eyes welled up slightly. Just then, there was a loud knocking at the door. Thud, thud. Liz opened the door. The village chief was standing outside. "Don't open the door. Just listen to me." His voice was grave. "The soldiers have brought a caravan of slaves. One of those men will be chosen as your new husband. Come with me to the mountain in the morning and have food ready for the soldiers too." Hearing this, Liz turned pale. Her previous marriage had been nothing short of hell. She had been beaten and humiliated daily, enduring constant pain. For a moment, the thought of running away crossed her mind. But then her gaze fell upon her daughter. The child wasn't her own flesh and blood. She was the daughter of her late husband's first wife. Yet, she couldn't just leave her behind. Perhaps the child sensed her distress. She ran over and wrapped her small arms around Liz in a hug. At that moment, tears streamed down Liz's face. She tucked the child into bed and gazed at her for a long time. The child didn't even have a name yet. And that was precisely what frightened her the most. If the new husband turned out to be just like the first one, her life might well become a nightmare all over again. Liz was reminded of her past, of the time her father had sold her for nothing more than a rabbit skin. A man living in the mountains had bought her. As soon as she arrived at his home, he began to beat her. From that day on, her life was filled with constant abuse and pain. Had that little girl not come into her life, she might have broken down long ago. Then one day, her husband went hunting and never returned. Later, the village headman revealed that a wild animal had killed him. His body was never even found. Upon hearing this news, Liz breathed a sigh of relief for the first time. She believed her nightmare had finally ended, but now it seemed as though a new nightmare was knocking at her door. Liz felt a sense of relief upon hearing the news of her husband's death, but her happiness was short-lived. In this world, a woman held no standing without a husband. Yet, thinking of her daughter, she resolved to face her fate once more. The next morning, she baked some bread and went out to the soldiers. Her heart shuddered the moment she laid eyes on the wagon carrying the slaves. A man was about to take his own life by driving a sharp spike into his neck. The sight reopened old wounds. There had been a time when she, too, had contemplated doing the very same thing. Without a moment's hesitation, Liz rushed toward him and stopped him. As she drew closer, she noticed the man's sunken cheeks, disheveled hair, and the despair lurking in his eyes. Silently, she held out a piece of her bread to him. But before she could say a word, the village chief arrived. He ordered Liz to return to her hut and took charge of the slave trading himself. Liz and the little girl cast one last glance at the man before walking away. They had no idea that the man was Ju Huan. Ju Huan stared at the bread in his hand for a long moment. Only a short while ago, he had wanted to die, and now a stranger had given him a reason to live. His entire focus was on the bread, yet he could not bring himself to take even a single bite. The soldiers dragged him out. Soon, he was kneeling before the village chief alongside 2 other slaves. Armed soldiers stood guard all around them. Just then, a soldier stepped forward. He drew a knife and made a shallow cut on each of their arms. A few drops of blood were dripped onto 2 special sheets of paper. The very next instant, the papers began to glow with a soft blue light. Ju Huan's eyes widened. He had never seen a sight like this before. Magic? Countless questions began to swirl in his mind. What kind of world had he ended up in? A world where humans were enslaved and sold, and where mysterious contracts that glowed with the color of blood existed. Once the contract was finalized, a soldier leaned in and whispered something into the village chief's ear. The chief nodded silently. Then his gaze fell upon Ju Huan. He began to walk slowly toward him, as if a significant decision had already been made. Meanwhile, Liz returned to the hut with her daughter. A short while later, a village woman arrived with rations to last them several days. Smiling, she said, "Your new husband doesn't speak our language. You'll face some communication difficulties at first." Liz remained silent. Anxiety was still clearly visible on her face. Seeing this, the woman tried to reassure her. "He may look ordinary, but his hands are as soft as a nobleman's. And don't worry, your previous husband was notorious throughout the village. People only tolerated him because he was the guardian of the mountain." She paused briefly before adding, "If your new husband performs that duty well, perhaps the two of you can live out the rest of your lives in comfort." Liz replied in a low voice, "I don't expect him to be a saint. I just want him not to be violent." Just then, the door to the hut opened. The village chief stepped inside. Standing behind him was a massive man. Liz's eyes widened. It was the very same man she had saved from death a short while ago, but now seeing him up close, she realized just how huge and intimidating his physique was. Involuntarily, her hands began to tremble. Across from her, Ju Huan recognized her as well. She was the woman who had given him bread, yet he couldn't understand why she looked so nervous upon seeing him. Then the village chief stepped forward. He took Ju Huan's hand and positioned him in front of Liz. He then lifted Liz's hand and clasped their palms together. The little girl stood between them. In that moment, they truly looked like an unusual family. Ju Huan didn't understand a single word of their language, but seeing the smiles of the people around him, the chief's look of satisfaction, and Liz's bashful expression, he understood one thing. Someone had got him married. Ju Heevan finally remembered what that mysterious Santa had said. He had promised to give him a wife as lovely as a rabbit and a daughter as cute as a weasel. At the time, Ju Heevan had thought it was a joke, but seeing Liz and his little daughter standing before him now, he realized the old man hadn't been lying. He was happy to see his dream come true, but at the same time, anger was boiling within him. If that Santa intended to give him all this anyway, why had he been forced to endure a hell of hunger, cold, and slavery? Ju Heevan silently vowed that if he ever met that old Santa again, he would make him taste the same kind of hardship. Liz and the little girl shrank back, startled by the anger surfacing on his face. Both were already terrified by memories of their past lives. Meanwhile, the village chief looked satisfied. Guarding the mountain was no easy task. The man who lived there had to be strong and courageous. So he decided to put Ju Heevan to the test. He signaled a villager to step forward. The villager extended his hand with a smile. Ju Heevan didn't understand their language, but he grasped the nature of the challenge. As their hands met, he instinctively exerted force. The very next moment, the villager's face twisted in pain. It felt as though his hand had been caught in iron pincers. Ju Heevan immediately let go, but the result of the test was clear. The chief nodded in satisfaction, then he was handed a bow. After a few gestures, Ju Heevan understood that he was supposed to hunt a fleeing rabbit. He had never fired a bow in his life. Mimicking the stance he had seen at the Olympics, he released the arrow. Shh! The arrow whizzed right past the rabbit. The rabbit escaped, yet the village chief seemed impressed. At the very least, Ju Heewan possessed courage. Just then, Liz and her daughter approached him, carrying a basket. Seeing them, Ju Heewan was momentarily captivated. He still couldn't quite believe that such a beautiful woman had become his wife. Noticing his hesitation, the chief smiled. He realized that this young man had likely never been close to a woman before. So he led everyone away, leaving the couple alone. The sudden silence made Liz feel even more nervous. Nevertheless, she resolved to fulfill her duties as a wife. She spread a cloth on the ground, laid out the food, and fed her daughter first. Then the three of them sat down to eat together. The atmosphere was awkward. Ju Heewan wanted to introduce himself, but the language barrier stood between them. Once again, he felt a surge of anger toward the Santa who had cast him into this unfamiliar world. But when he looked at Liz and her daughter, a faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps it wasn't all that bad. After the meal, the village chief walked them to their home atop the mountain. The path was long and steep. Before long, Liz and the little girl were struggling for breath. Seeing their condition, Ju Heewan stepped forward. Liz immediately grew anxious, but Ju Heewan said nothing. He simply lifted both mother and daughter gently into his arms. Liz's eyes widened in surprise. Meanwhile, the little girl giggled with delight. Ju Heewan began to ascend the mountain. As they walk along, Ju even realizes just how frail their bodies are. He understands that they haven't had a proper, nutritious meal in a long time. This realization motivates him even more to learn their language quickly, so he can communicate openly with them and provide the good food needed to make them healthy and strong. Liz doesn't know exactly what is going through Ju Heevan's mind, but she clearly senses the determination on his face. Her wariness begins to fade, and she gently wipes the sweat from his brow. After a while, they reach the mountaintop. Ju Heevan thanks the village chief for showing them the way. Once the chief leaves, he heads toward the small mountain cabin that is to be his new home, but the moment his eyes fall upon the cabin, his heart sinks. The dilapidated structure is in such a wretched state that he fears he might have to spend yet another night in the freezing cold. Cursing the cold under his breath, he steps inside only to stop dead in his tracks at the sight before him. Liz is standing there. Her eyes are brimming with tears, and deep distress is clearly etched on her face. Juivan wants to ask what has happened, but before he can say a word, Liz suddenly turns and runs off. After running for a while, she stops by the edge of a quiet lake. It turns out that while they were away, someone had broken into the cabin and looted everything: pots, the table, bows, hammers, knives, and even the farming hoe. Not a single essential item was left in the house. Now they didn't even have the means to repair the broken cabin. It was clear that they would have to spend the night under the open sky in the biting cold, with the constant threat of wild animals looming over them. The mere thought of what lay ahead completely shattered Liz. Tears streamed down her face, and she was at a loss as to what would happen next. Just then, Juivan approached her. A look of relief washed over his face upon seeing her safe and sound. He quietly sat beside her and placed his hand gently on her head. Liz did not understand his language, but the warmth of his touch and the concern in his eyes spoke volumes. She could sense that Juivan was trying to give her strength. Surviving in this desolate and harsh place was by no means easy. Their cabin was completely dilapidated, and looking at Juivan, it seemed as though her new husband had never in his life engaged in any strenuous physical labor. However, repairing the cabin wasn't her primary concern. She could manage that task herself somehow. The real problem was food. If they were to survive, they would have to hunt every day. Yet looking at Juivan, it didn't seem at all likely that he knew how to use a bow or any other weapon. Negative thoughts kept flooding her mind. The future was uncertain, and she saw nothing but difficulties ahead. And yet there was a strange sense of peace in her heart. Whenever her gaze fell upon Juivan, she felt an indescribable sense of relief. Somehow she was absolutely certain that no matter how dire the circumstances, Juivan would eventually set everything right. Liz is overwhelmed by these emotions, and tears begin to stream down her face. Meanwhile, Juivan slowly begins to open up about his heart's deepest feelings. He reveals that he lost his parents at a very young age in his own world. There was a time when the entire world seemed hopeless and cruel to him, yet he never gave up. He kept moving forward, facing every hardship along the way. Today he is glad he didn't lose heart, for had he broken down back then, he might never have met Liz. That is why he had made a silent vow to himself. He would protect Liz and her daughter at all costs. He would provide them with a life where they lacked nothing essential and could always remain safe and happy. Liz could not understand a single word he said, as they spoke different languages. Yet the sincerity of his heart was evident in his face and demeanor, far more than words could convey. She could sense that Juivan truly cared for her and her daughter. This realization dispels the last traces of hesitation in her heart. The very next moment, she steps forward and embraces Juivan tightly, releasing all the fear, pain, and emotions she had kept bottled up inside along with her tears. But just then, the little girl sees her mother bathed in tears. In her innocence, she immediately jumps to the wrong conclusion. She thinks Juivan has hurt her mother, just as her previous father had. Determined to protect her mother, she rushes over without a moment's hesitation, stands in front of Liz, and tries to pull her away from Juivan, but Juivan doesn't stop her. Instead, he gently pulls her toward himself and embraces her as well. Juivan doesn't yet know who the child's biological father was, or why Liz bought her and brought her home, but there is one thing he knows with absolute certainty. These two are now his family. In that moment, he makes a firm resolve in his heart to become the best husband and the best father in the world. No matter what, he will give Liz and her daughter a life where they lack nothing and where tears never fall from their eyes again. The family returns to the cabin. As they step inside, an awkward silence settles over them. No one speaks. Having shed tears in front of one another just moments ago, they are unsure of how to break the ice. Finally, Juivan decides to break the silence. He introduces himself by slowly stating his name. Knowing they do not understand Korean, he enunciates each word clearly and deliberately so they can grasp it. Fortunately, both Liz and the little girl are quick to understand. They immediately catch his name correctly. Juivan then smiles, gestures toward them, and invites them to introduce themselves as well. Liz goes first, stating her name and teaching him the correct pronunciation. Juivan compliments her name, then smiles at the little girl and asks her to share her name too. However, the little girl simply stands there in silence, her head bowed. With a look of sadness, Liz explains that her late husband never gave their daughter a name, and after his death, their lives became so fraught with hardship that she, too, never found the opportunity to name her child. Juiwan is astonished to hear this. He finds it hard to believe that a child could live without a name. Right then, he decides to name her himself. He considers several options, but ultimately chooses the name Dorothy. It was the name of the protagonist from The Wizard of Oz, one of his favorite stories from childhood. The little girl loves her new name. For the first time, genuine happiness shines in her eyes. Smiling, she thanks Juivan for giving her such a lovely name. Juivan smiles back, happy to see her joy. Silently, he vows that her life, too, will be filled with happiness and hope, just like Dorothy's in the books. As evening falls, Juivan is outside chopping thick logs for the fireplace. Standing a short distance away, Liz watches him quietly. Her mind keeps replaying the events of the day. She softly murmurs Juivan's name. It isn't a name from her own language, yet it sounds incredibly pleasant to her ears. This thought sparks a new question in her mind. Who exactly is Juivan? And where has he come from? Ever since she could remember, every man who had entered her life had brought her nothing but pain. First her father, and then her husband. That is why she cannot fathom why Juivan is treating her and her daughter with such kindness. Meanwhile, while chopping wood, Juivan spots her standing in the distance. He smiles, waves at her, and calls out her name affectionately. Liz snaps out of her reverie and for the first time looks at him closely. She notices that Juivan has black hair and black eyes, just like the hero in a story she had heard a while back. According to that story, a fierce war was raging in a kingdom far away. To save their world, the people there had summoned a great hero from another realm, and that hero, too, had black hair and black eyes. For a fleeting moment, a strange hope stirs within Liz. Could Juivan be that very hero? But the very next instant, she smiles at the thought, dismissing it. If he were truly a great hero, how could he be living as a slave in this dilapidated village? Just then, Juivan approaches her. Now seeing him up close, she realizes that his eyes and hair are not black, but dark brown. Liz breathes a sigh of relief. So he is just an ordinary person. Yes, he was certainly a bit taller and different from the others, but ultimately he was just an ordinary man. With this thought, the illusion in her mind shatters, but at the same time, her cheeks flush a soft pink. She herself cannot fathom how she came to imagine so much about a stranger. Juivan finds the mix of emotions playing across Liz's face utterly endearing. Smiling, he gently strokes her head. Liz freezes for a moment as she feels his touch. For the first time in her life, a man's touch holds no fear, only a sense of belonging and warmth. The innocent serenity and faint smile on her face make Juivan's heart race. He cannot hold himself back. Just as a bee is drawn instinctively to a flower, he slowly moves closer to Liz and plants a soft kiss on her lips. Liz's eyes widen in surprise. She had never expected Juivan to do such a thing. Juivan, too, realizes what he has done the very next moment. What have I done? His face flushes red with embarrassment. Unable to muster the courage to handle the situation, he runs away. As he runs, he keeps berating himself. We only met a day ago. How could I do something so foolish? Lost in his thoughts, he doesn't even realize when he wanders deep into the forest. When he finally snaps back to reality, he starts looking for a way back to the cabin. Just then, he senses a terrifying presence behind him. A shiver runs through his entire body. He slowly turns around and his breath catches in his throat at the sight before him. A massive wolf stood right in front of him. It was nearly as large as Juivan, and its glowing eyes revealed only one thing: prey. Juivan's throat goes dry. He is torn. Should he run or stand his ground and risk his life? Finally, he picks up a thick piece of wood lying on the ground and readies himself for the fight. Meanwhile, the wolf is also crouched, poised to attack. The very next moment, it lunges at Juivan with lightning speed. Juivan holds the wood up in front of him like a shield. The wolf's sharp teeth sink into the wood. Seizing the opportunity, Juivan delivers a powerful punch to its face. The wolf growls in pain, but the next instant, in a fit of rage, it bites down on the wood so hard that it snaps in two. Now Juivan is left with no means of defense. He tries to take the initiative and attack, but the wolf proves to be even faster. It clamps its jaws directly onto his wrist. Its sharp teeth tear through his skin, leaving a deep wound. Juivan recoils, screaming in pain. It feels as though his entire arm is burning in fire, but when he looks at his hand, his eyes widen in astonishment. Flames are actually erupting from his wound. How is this possible? Was this magic? A newfound confidence suddenly surges within him. The wolf, too, is frightened by the mysterious flames and begins to retreat, but this time Juivan gives it no chance to escape. He charges toward it, his fist wreathed in flames, punch after punch, each blow more powerful than the last. The wolf howls continuously in pain, but Juivan does not stop until it collapses to the ground completely lifeless. As the wolf dies, Juivan too sits down on the ground exhausted. He looks at his hand, panting. The hand that had been engulfed in flames just moments ago now appeared completely normal. No burn marks, no wounds, even the deep gash on his wrist had vanished entirely. Juivan couldn't fathom how he had managed to use magic without any training. Memories of the fantasy novels he had read in his past life came flooding back. Filled with excitement, he tried casting various spells: Fireball, Firestorm, Firewall. He even attempted a famous magical spell he recalled, but nothing happened. After several attempts, he gave up. He became convinced that there must be a specific way to wield magic in this world, something he would have to learn. But one thing was now crystal clear. He truly possessed magical power, and now his primary goal was to gain full control over that power as quickly as possible, because only then could he become a better hunter, and if the need arose, heal his small family. After all, there was no doctor on this desolate mountain to help them. Juivan clenches his fist tightly. In that very moment, he makes a vow to himself. He will become stronger than ever before, strong enough to protect his small family at any cost and to give them the life they deserve. He never wants to be called cursed again, to be the person people claim brought nothing but death wherever he went. As these thoughts cross his mind, painful memories of his childhood come flooding back. After his parents died, no relative was willing to take him in. Only his grandfather had given him a home, but perhaps even that was not meant to be. Not long after, his grandfather also passed away. Afterward, his cousins heaped all the blame on him. They would beat him mercilessly, calling him cursed, an omen of bad luck and a harbinger of death. They believed that anyone who cared for him was destined to die. Juivan takes a deep breath and shakes off those painful memories. He didn't have time to get lost in the past right now. He needed to quickly dispose of the dead wolf. If the scent of its blood spread through the forest, other ferocious predators might be drawn to the spot. He hoists the entire wolf onto his shoulders and walks with heavy steps toward his small cabin on the mountain. He knew the wolf's meat could feed his family for days. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Liz and Dorothy were preparing dinner. Suddenly, Dorothy glances toward the window. She spots a massive wolf outside, seemingly staring right at them. Terrified, she lets out a scream and bursts into tears. Upon hearing her daughter's voice, Liz grabs a knife from the kitchen without a moment's hesitation. Trembling, she moves toward the window. But the very next moment, her eyes widen in astonishment. It wasn't a live wolf, it was Juivan. Returning home with a dead wolf slung over his shoulders, seeing him, Liz breathes a sigh of relief, but then her gaze falls upon the wounds on Juivan's face and clothes. Her heart begins to pound. Without delay, she rushes outside toward him. She instantly realizes that Juivan has just come from an incredibly dangerous fight. Otherwise, his body wouldn't bear so many marks. Juivan smiles and tries to convey through gestures that there is no cause for concern. They were just minor scratches. And he is completely fine now. Liz doesn't understand his language, but her eyes understand everything. The very next moment, she steps forward and embraces Juivan tightly. For a moment, Juivan is completely stunned. He hadn't expected Liz to hug him herself. Just then, little Dorothy comes running and clings to his legs. She keeps saying something in her innocent way. Even though Juivan doesn't understand the words, the worry hidden in her eyes is clearly visible. Juivan smiles. He realizes that both of them were truly worried about him. This realization touches his heart. But at the same time, he feels a twinge of sadness because he had promised himself that he would never let tears fill their eyes again. That promise didn't even last a single day. The next morning, once things had quieted down, Juivan set about preparing the wolf. He first skinned it and then began carefully separating the meat from the bones. He had watched his grandfather perform this task many times during his childhood. His grandfather loved raising animals and would often butcher and prepare them himself for special occasions. Because of this, Juivan knew the basic technique, but once he started doing it himself, he realized it wasn't nearly as easy as it looked. Still, no matter the difficulty, he had to do this to feed his family. He was just about to resume his work when Liz walked into the barn carrying a basket. Smiling, she held the basket out to him so the prepared meat could be placed inside. Huiwan was pleased by her offer to help. He wanted to thank her, but his pronunciation was so awkward that the words wouldn't come out right. Seeing this, Liz smiled gently and patiently began teaching him the correct pronunciation. When Huiwan finally managed to say thank you correctly, a smile blossomed on Liz's face, unconsciously. For perhaps the first time in her life, someone had thanked her from the bottom of their heart. In that moment, she realized she had shared so many firsts in her life with Huiwan. The first time someone respected her, the first time someone thanked her, and the first time someone kissed her with love. This thought sparked a new question in her mind. Was this Huiwan's first kiss too? Or had there been someone else in his life before? As soon as this thought crosses her mind, she feels a slight pang of jealousy. She herself doesn't understand why she is feeling this way. For a moment, her thoughts begin to wander, but she takes a deep breath and composes herself. This was not the time to get lost in daydreams. She still had to help Huiwan and put all the meat into the basket. Unable to hide her embarrassment any longer, Liz's face turns beet red. Liz takes a deep breath to steady her wandering thoughts. She reminds herself that now is not the time to get lost in daydreams. She still had to help Juivan prepare the bucket full of meat, but just as she moves to do some messy or heavy work, Juivan smiles and stops her. He starts doing all the difficult work himself. Seeing this, Liz becomes even more confused. In her world, such tasks always fell to women, but Juivan was doing it all without hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for him. She couldn't understand why this man was so different. Meanwhile, Juivan slowly moves closer to her. His face comes right up to hers. Liz's heart begins to race. Only one thought crosses her mind. Is he going to kiss me again? At that thought, her eyes close instinctively. But the very next moment, instead of her lips, Juivan plants a gentle kiss on her forehead. Liz immediately opens her eyes. She feels a tinge of embarrassment at her own expectation. She had been thinking that perhaps this time he would kiss her on the lips. Juivan instantly notices the bashfulness on her face. He smiles faintly and leans towards her once more. This time, Liz stubbornly keeps her eyes open. She thinks Juivan might be about to tease her again, but that doesn't happen. He gently places a small, tender kiss on her lips. For a moment, Liz is completely taken aback. She hadn't expected Juivan to actually do it. Her face turns red with embarrassment. Just then, she catches sight of Dorothy. A wave of nervousness washes over her. What if she saw us? The mere thought makes her feel even more embarrassed, and the very next moment, she rushes out of the barn in a panic, looking just like a cartoon character. As soon as Liz leaves, Dorothy feels it is now her responsibility to help Juiwan. She begins to help in whatever way she can with her tiny hands. Although she isn't able to do much, Juiwan still smiles and thanks her sincerely. Hearing that was enough to bring a lovely smile to the little girl's face. Juiwan picks up the bucket filled with meat and enters the main cabin. His expression changes the moment he steps inside. A pungent stench of rotting hides permeates the entire room. At first, he doesn't understand why Liz is drying animal hides right inside her living quarters. But when he watches her carefully cleaning them, he realizes just how valuable these hides are to her. In that moment, he also becomes aware of his own naivety. There were still so many things about this world that he knew absolutely nothing about. Things that were considered common and cheap in his previous world were proving to be incredibly valuable here. Juhiwan realizes that if he truly wants to live in this world, simply being strong won't be enough. He also needs to learn about local trade, the value of goods and financial transactions. Otherwise, a cunning merchant could easily take advantage of him someday. Meanwhile, Liz sets about salting the meat to preserve it for the long term. Seeing this, Juhiwan thinks it would be better to head into the forest and get some more work done rather than sitting idle. But just as he starts to leave, Liz stops him. Concern is clearly visible on her face. She is afraid that Juhiwan might get injured again. Juhiwan smiles and reassures her with gestures that this time he is only going to chop wood. There won't be any danger. Finally, Liz reluctantly lets him go. Upon reaching the forest, Juhiwan spots a small tree. He thinks it would be perfect for practice. In reality, he had been hoping to find an oak tree, as he had heard its wood was considered the best for a fireplace. However, he could not distinguish between the different species of trees, so he decided to practice on whatever tree was right in front of him. He takes aim at the tree, tightens his grip on the axe, and strikes with all his might, but his grip still wasn't firm enough. As the blow lands, the axe slips from his hand, flies off, and falls to the ground. Ju Hee-won feels embarrassed for a moment. He quickly glances around to see if anyone witnessed the incident. After hours of hard work, he finally returns to the cabin carrying a large sack filled with wood. Although he had promised Liz he wouldn't hurt himself this time, practicing with the axe was no easy task. His hands kept slipping, leaving his body covered in minor scratches and wounds. Seeing him in that state, Liz becomes worried and immediately sets about cleaning his wounds and applying ointment. Dorothy wants to help too. She takes some water from a jar and innocently sprinkles it on Ju Hee-won, hoping to make him feel a bit better. Even though half the water spills onto the ground during her attempt, Ju Hee-won understands her sweet gesture. He smiles and gently strokes her head, and Dorothy beams with happiness. Once the wounds are tended to, the three of them sit down at the dining table. Today Liz serves meat from the very wolf Ju Hee-won had hunted the previous evening. After many days, the family finally had the chance to eat their fill of meat. Dorothy was the happiest of them all. She eats so much that shortly after her eyelids begin to droop, and she drifts into a deep sleep. Ju Hee-won smiles as he lifts her into his arms and gently lays her down on the bed, ensuring she can sleep comfortably without getting cold. Meanwhile, Liz prepares some warm water for Ju Hee-won so he can wash away the dust, dirt, and fatigue of the day. In keeping with the traditions of this medieval world, it was the wife's role to care for her husband and, when necessary, bathe him. With a damp cloth and gentle hands, Liz begins to wipe the dust from Ju Hee-won's body. Ju Hee-won finds comfort in the realization that for the first time, someone is caring for him with such genuine concern. At the same time, Liz feels a sense of shyness with every passing moment. Whenever her gaze falls upon Ju Hee-won's strong physique, she immediately looks away. Her face repeatedly flushes with embarrassment. Ju Hee-won senses her nervousness. Smiling, he gently takes her hand and plants an affectionate kiss on her forehead. For a few moments, they remain lost in each other's eyes. This quiet, tender moment deepens the bond between them more than ever before. That night, the trust and sense of belonging between them grow even stronger. That night, perhaps for the first time, Liz sleeps in complete peace and tranquility. Since childhood, she had spent almost every night in fear and pain. Her family was extremely poor, so they all lived in a single room. In such an environment, her parents often quarreled. Her father would vent his anger on her mother, while Liz and her siblings watched helplessly. Every morning, her mother's body would bear the marks of abuse, and she would silently shed tears. Because of this, Liz always feared that her own future might mirror her mother's. But fate had chosen a different path for her. She met Ju Hee-won, a man who always treated her with respect, cared for her, and embraced Dorothy as his own daughter. To him, Liz was nothing less than a queen, and Dorothy was his little princess. Now, every morning, Liz would wake up to the sound of crackling wood in the fireplace, logs that had kept them safe from the cold all night long, and every morning, her greatest joy was waking up beside the very person who had first made her feel safe, respected, and truly cherished. Liz knew that not every day of married life is beautiful. That is why she wanted to cherish every happy moment spent with Ju Hee-won, big or small, in her heart forever. The next morning, while the rest of the cabin was still deep in slumber, Liz quietly rose from her bed and set about her daily chores. She had no desire to leave the warmth and comfort of Ju Hee-won's embrace, yet she knew that household responsibilities awaited her. It was the best way she could think of to show her gratitude to Ju Hee-won, the man who had transformed both her life and Dorothy's in such a short span of time. Although Ju Hee-won was now living in this medieval world, his mindset remained modern. So as soon as he woke up, he too got out of bed and began helping Liz with the chores. He tended to the hearth fire, arranged the firewood, and took care of various other small tasks himself. Liz was amazed to see this. In her world, men did not typically perform such tasks. While working, Ju Hee-won tried to speak a few words he had recently learned. His pronunciation wasn't perfect yet, but his efforts brought a smile to Liz's face. Then, smiling, he affectionately called her honey. At the sound of this, Liz's face turned as red as a cherry. No one had ever addressed her with such affection before. Seeing Liz's bashfulness, Ju Hee-won felt a playful urge to tease her further. He thoroughly enjoyed teasing her as he watched her face flush with embarrassment. And so the two of them shared laughter and tender, loving moments together. Meanwhile, Dorothy also woke up. However, it wasn't their voices that had roused her from sleep. All night long she'd been dreaming of delicious meat. The very first thought that crossed her mind upon waking was, what if all the meat is gone? She quickly runs over to the bucket where the meat was kept. As soon as she peeks inside and sees that all the meat is still safe, a smile of relief spreads across her face. Now she eagerly begins to wait for breakfast. Seeing that look of innocent joy on Dorothy's face, Ju-hwan also smiles. At that very moment, he decides to himself that he will go to the forest again today so that he can hunt more and gather plenty of food for his family. Seeing Dorothy so happy while eating meat brings a smile to Ju-hwan's face as well. He realizes that if he wants to see this happiness on his family's faces forever, he must work even harder. Now he didn't care at all whether he might encounter wolves or a ferocious lion in the forest. He had only one goal in mind: to ensure his family never went to sleep hungry. With this thought, he sets out this time carrying a sturdy axe. He no longer held a simple wooden stick. Instead, he carried a weapon that could save his life if the need arose. Gripping the axe firmly, Ju-hwan ventures deeper into the forest. An eerie silence hung all around. Even the wind blowing through the trees seemed to signal that something ominous was afoot. Just then, he suddenly senses an incredibly heavy and terrifying presence. The sensation was so dreadful that the giant wolf, which had nearly cost him his life just a few days earlier, seemed insignificant compared to this presence. Ju-hwan's entire body goes on high alert. He tightens his grip on the axe. His eyes dart around, scanning the surroundings. Holding his breath, he waits for the dangerous creature hiding behind the bushes to emerge. But the very next moment, what steps out from behind the bushes is not a wild animal. There he senses an oppressive presence, one that feels even more suffocating than the terrifying wolf he had hunted just days earlier. For this reason, Ju-hwan grips his axe even tighter and waits for the beast to emerge. But instead of a beast, a hooded man steps out. Earlier, the hooded man had been wandering through the forest as usual when he spotted a bloodstain that appeared to belong to a large animal, likely a massive wolf. Startled by the sight, he became curious about which group from the village had ventured into these mountains to hunt the wolf. Consequently, he decided to keep a watch on the mountain for several days to track them down. However, despite days of observation, the only person he saw was Ju-hwan, a man with a massive frame and powerful muscles. At first, the hooded man suspected that Ju-hwan might be the wolf hunter, but upon observing his movements closely, he realized that Ju-hwan didn't even know how to wield an axe properly. This discovery only deepened his confusion. Finally, to satisfy his curiosity, he decided to confront Ju-hwan himself today. But when he finally approached Ju-hwan, the first thing the old man noticed was the wolf bite mark on his arm. He was astonished to see that such a deep wound had almost completely healed in such a short period of time. Normally, an ordinary villager living in this mountainous region would have died within days from such a wound becoming infected, as there was no doctor available to treat it. But Ju-hwan stood before him in perfect condition, as if he had never suffered any serious injury. Seeing this, the old man came to only one conclusion. Ju-hwan was no ordinary human being, but a magician, and one with extraordinary powers. This realization was nothing less than a ray of hope for him. In fact, he had almost given up hope of achieving his years-long revenge. But now, with a talented and powerful magician like Ju-hwan before him, he felt confident that if he planned correctly, he would one day be able to exact his revenge. Although the hooded man appeared older today, there was a time when he was filled with the vigor and strength of his youth. During that time, he accepted a job as a caretaker of this mountain for a nobleman. The most important aspect of this job was that if a war broke out, he would be called upon to fight as a soldier. And if he displayed exceptional bravery in battle, the nobleman could honor him with a government position. This would elevate him from the life of an ordinary villager to a place among the elite. He had arrived at this mountain with this hope. The village at the foot of the mountain was peaceful, prosperous, and abundant with resources. But even this peaceful place hid a problem. Villagers had to venture deep into the forest to gather firewood. However, the forest was perilous, and most of those who wandered too far inside never returned. Consequently, when the masked man became the mountain's guardian, his duties required him to venture into the dense forest to collect wood. But one day he ventured far too deep, and a terrible accident befell him. He was severely injured and suffered a broken leg. For the mountain's guardian, being physically fit and capable was essential. Thus, the accident shattered all his dreams in an instant. He was cursing his fate in utter despair when he encountered a goblin. Goblins were a race of monsters that abducted human women and forced them to bear their offspring. Fortunately, he managed to escape their clutches alive. However, due to his severe injuries, he was forced to leave his job prematurely, and he spent the rest of his life in that very village. Yet not a single day passed during those 20 years when his hatred for the goblins diminished. With each passing day, his resolve to exact revenge grew even stronger. Yet not a single day passed during those 20 years when his hatred for goblins diminished. That is why he constantly sought an opportunity to exact revenge on them. And then one day, he met Juhiwan. Juhiwan appeared as a new ray of hope for him. He possessed an incredibly robust physique, his wounds healed at an extraordinary rate, and above all, the hooded man was convinced that Juhiwan was no ordinary human but a powerful sorcerer. With this conviction, he decided to dedicate the rest of his life to training Juhiwan to become the world's most powerful hunter. Subsequently, the hooded man began to keep a silent watch on Juhiwan. Meanwhile, Juhiwan was also keeping a vigilant eye on the old man's every move, fearing he might suddenly take some unexpected action. But then the old man suddenly told him that he wanted to make him his apprentice and teach him everything he had learned throughout his life. Juhiwan was completely taken aback by this, as he could not fathom the old man's true intentions. Juhiwan was completely taken aback by the offer to become the old man's disciple and learn all his skills. He couldn't quite fathom what the man's true intentions were. The next morning, Juhiwan had breakfast and prepared himself for training. But this time he wasn't alone. Accompanying him was the mysterious hooded man who was set to teach him the essential skills needed to become a professional hunter. Although Juhiwan had accepted his help, he still didn't trust the man one bit. After all, the man seemed just as suspicious to him as the greedy manager from his old world. That was why he decided to keep the man away from his family, making him wait outside the house. As Juhiwan got ready to leave, Liz lovingly packed him a lunch, knowing he wouldn't be back home for quite some time. After packing his bag, Juhiwan said goodbye to Liz and Dorothy, and both of them smiled as they saw him off. To others, this might have been an ordinary, everyday occurrence, but for Juhiwan, the moment was incredibly special. He still found it hard to believe that he had found such a beautiful, affectionate family. He considered himself truly fortunate. That was precisely why he was stepping out, to train and become even stronger for the sake of his family. The hooded man was unaware of the true motivation behind Juhiwan's drive, but seeing such a strong determination to learn within him, he felt deeply satisfied. For the time being, the old man did not want to tell Juhiwan anything about the goblins. He intended to keep this secret until the contract between them was fulfilled. Once the agreement was sealed, Juhiwan would not be able to back out of accompanying him, even if the mere mention of goblins terrified him. Afterward, the old man led Juhiwan deeper into the forest and instructed him to mimic his movements exactly. Juhiwan noticed that the old man walked in a highly unusual manner. His steps followed no set sequence, making it impossible for anyone following him to discern a clear pattern. Juhiwan began to imitate his gait. As he did so, he wondered if this was the very same special footwork he had read about in the martial arts comics from his old world. Meanwhile, the old man watched with a smile as Juhiwan diligently tried to replicate every move and master that unique footwork. Once he had taught Juhiwan how to create a path that would confuse enemies, he moved on to teaching him various other vital survival techniques for the forest. He showed Juhiwan how to identify different types of trees simply by touching them and observing their texture and shape. Furthermore, he taught him how to map the forest so that he could easily find his way out if he ever got lost. He also explained how to use his eyes and ears effectively to determine the right direction and how to avoid detection by wild animals or other predators. The two continued their training without pause. Eventually, they reached a large rock where the old man signaled for a brief rest, allowing Juhiwan to catch his breath and regain his strength with a bite to eat. Juhiwan was quite pleased with this break as he finally had the chance to eat the lunch Liz had lovingly packed for him that morning. His lunch consisted of a fried egg and a few pieces of steak, perfect for satisfying his hunger and replenishing his energy after such rigorous training. But before Juhiwan could even take a single bite, the old man told him to pack the food away. He explained that the aroma of the food could alert nearby wild animals to their presence. Juhiwan was quite disappointed to hear this. He had been looking forward to eating the lunch his wife had packed for him since morning, but rules are rules. So the old man signaled him to get up, saying they still had a long way to go. A short while later, they reached their destination. Before them stood a small wooden hut perched high on the mountain. That hut was the old man's home. Upon entering, he took out a massive bow and handed it to Juhiwan. Juhiwan had never seen such a heavy and sturdy bow in his life. He could hardly believe that a human being could even pull its string. He wondered how the old man would manage to use it, but the very next moment, the old man proved him wrong. Effortlessly, he drew the bowstring and released an arrow. It flew with such speed that it seemed to pierce right through a tree. Ju Hee-won was left completely stunned by the sight. He had never imagined that such immense strength lay hidden within the old man at his age. Then, the old man ordered Ju Hee-won to pick up the same bow and try to shoot an arrow just as he had done. However, Ju Hee-won had never handled such a heavy bow before, so shooting an arrow correctly was far from easy for him. The old man showed no signs of impatience. He patiently corrected Ju Hee-won's posture and taught him the proper technique, rectifying every mistake, big or small, along the way. With every correction, Ju Hee-won learned something new and his archery technique steadily improved. Although he had never undergone archery training before, his ability to learn was remarkable. In no time, he began to master the skill rapidly. Meanwhile, just as Ju Hee-won was fully engrossed in his training with the hooded old man, Dorothy woke up in a panic, startled by a terrifying nightmare from her childhood. The old fear resurfaced, the dread that Liz and Ju Hee-won might one day leave her all alone just as her biological parents had abandoned her. Upon waking, she rushed anxiously to find Liz, but Liz was nowhere to be seen. Seeing this, her fear deepened. She began to wonder if they had truly left her behind. That is when Dorothy's eyes fall upon the meat. She rushes towards it in a panic, only to find, upon reaching it, that the meat is still safely inside the bucket. Seeing this brings her some relief, yet her anxiety about Liz remains. Suddenly, loud voices are heard from outside. Dorothy immediately goes to the window and peers out. She sees 3 village men surrounding Liz, arguing with her and harassing her. At the sight of them, Dorothy's face turns pale with fear. She recognized the 3 of them all too well. They were the very associates of her biological father, who used to vent their rage on both her and Liz. Fearing that they might harm Liz again, Dorothy wanted to help her, but her fear was so paralyzing that she felt rooted to the spot, unable to do a thing.